Welcome to the latest episode of the Blazing Musket podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Pinzone, and we're joined this week by Hayden Bird, sports writer for the Boston Globe and Boston.com. You may have also heard Hayden on Revolution Recap. He tends to join that show at least a couple times every year. So hopefully you've heard and enjoyed him over there as well. He, of course, was also on the show with us last year. Hayden covers soccer as much as they let him over there, but he does, so he's here tonight to talk a little bit about the Revs, Legacy, the World Cup, which is now, for me personally, locked into being a disappointment. And we're also going to poke a little fun at old friend of the show, Josh Kraft. So just kind of a little bit of everything here for us and Hayden to talk about tonight. But Hayden, how are you doing now that we're almost there in terms of knowing who's actually going to play in this World Cup? And of course, by the time this comes out tomorrow morning, we will know if it is Iraq or Bolivia that will be team number 48.
Well, just in general, I feel good. I feel like, anytime I get to cover soccer in any capacity or talk about soccer, that's a great day. So I'm obviously thrilled to be back here. Thank you for having me. And it's a huge year for soccer, as we keep hearing. I think it's just a little more up in the air of whether or not this will be a great year for soccer or not. Because I think, as we see with sort of seemingly every additional detail about the World Cup, unrelated to Italy's recent fiasco, I guess, even unrelated to that, it's just kind of, I don't know, like I'm just not, the buzz maybe isn't there because it's just trampled under the weight of everyone's shameless profiteering, it seems like. But aside from that, there is going to be a World Cup that will happen and that will play out on the field, and that will be great. And I when that happens, I'm sure I will be absolutely thrilled and elated and experience all those emotions of a World Cup happening on home soil, which obviously does not happen a lot. So that plus all of the other things happening. I mean, yeah, like we're going to get into Legacy and we got the Revs and everything. Like, yeah, it's never been a bigger time for especially local soccer, and that's a good thing. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is certainly kind of a lot to, you have to look the other way and try not to notice, and just if you want to actually focus in on the games that are happening on the field. Like you said, the profiteering, the ticket prices, just many things that seem to be in the way of what when we, 3-4 years ago, it was just like, I can't wait for 2026 to get here. Can't wait for the World Cup. This is gonna be amazing. It's gonna be 40 minutes from my house. Like, oh man, wow, right? Like, so many things to look forward to. But yeah, the expectations have definitely been tampered a little bit. But I do think once it is still the World Cup, right? Like once the games are here, once they're being played, however much garbage is surrounding those games, they will actually finally happen, and we might just be able to focus on soccer for 4 weeks, which would be a nice break.
Yes, and it's like 4 years ago, or almost 4 years ago, the timing was off because Qatar was a Winter World Cup, even though they promised it wouldn't be. It's for all of the discussion around Qatar, referencing that, the tournament itself ended up being really good. The actual soccer and the final was, I would say, the best final in men's World Cup history. And, so I'm not saying that's a one-to-one comparison or that's a good thing necessarily, because yeah, there were a lot of really bad things with the Qatar World Cup, and there are a lot of really bad things with the US World Cup. And unfortunately, that seems to be kind of a through line with a lot of major super sporting events like the Olympics or the World Cup at this point, is this kind of Faustian bargain with governments involved and whatnot, and the regimes that are in power at that point. But yeah, ultimately it is about the sport on the field, and in that stance, it's going to be a huge and sprawling World Cup, and it'll be a new format. And so we'll see, how that plays out. But it could line up to still be an elite tournament. Who knows? I mean, it could just be one of those things where everything clicks and we see a lot of memorable games. So I'm hopeful for that part, of course, still.
Yeah, for sure. And we saw a little bit of that, right? We had kind of a small preview of what to expect this summer. We had Brazil play France in a friendly at Gillette Stadium last week. That seemed to go pretty well. I mean, I saw it, on the news. They kind of acted like, at least on Channel 5, they kind of act like there's never any traffic at Gillette Stadium after an event ends. But that is pretty common. That it is a challenge. It turns out, to get 60,000 people out of the same place all at the same time. But I heard from some people that took the MBTA that they were able to take that up to South Station. They said that actually went pretty smoothly. So do you think this is all going to shake out pretty well based on how the Brazil France game has gone, and the fact that look, 60, 70,000 people show up at Gillette quite often during the summer for not for the Revs, but for Taylor Swift or country, like it seems like this should go relatively smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of these huge, planned events. I remember, like you mentioned Taylor Swift when she did a concert here a few years ago. I remember someone saying like local news is treating it like an incoming blizzard, and it was like the coverage of it. And yeah, I mean, that's not unlike a lot of the coverage here. A lot of it obviously focuses on all of the problems. And, we saw you go on social media and you see all the videos of like, French fans or whoever being like, what is this? Being introduced to Route One, and like
Yeah, yeah,
finding
yeah.
out like, oh, it's a parking lot, and I'm not going to pretend like I didn't chuckle seeing some of that, but of course, that has real implications for people, and I feel bad for that, and yeah, this should, of course, be managed a little better. But yeah, I mean, if they're able to kind of, I hope they learned a lot from that experience. And I'm sure they did, like in terms of the logistics and how to move things and how to make things go when they should and how to organize things, hopefully a little bit. So, hopefully that's a good proving ground for them and they can, smooth out some of the kinks there. But yeah, obviously, they do big events at Gillette every single year. That's not a new thing. So they are capable of doing that. I think it's just whether or not the larger apparatus of the World Cup has really accurately prepared a lot of these fans from other countries for what they're going to experience. I mean, the misnomer of calling it Boston Stadium, for example, you start right there and then work your way down in terms of just like, are these, fans from Norway or Ghana or England or wherever, like, are they going to be really briefed appropriately on like what it's going to take to get to Gillette for a certain kickoff time or whatever? So you wonder about that. But I think for a lot of people, including obviously all the local fans who are just trying to go catch a game, the experience will probably just kind of be par for the course for going to a huge event at Gillette, as you said. So, yeah, I think ultimately, I mean, look, the town of Foxborough and those guys, they know how to run this sort of thing. It's just like there's only, it just, there's only so many lanes on Route One, even if you make it basically a one lane road. So,
Yeah,
it's going
yeah.
to take a little while to get in and out, and people are just going to have to realize that. But, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, especially as you said, if they run more trains, hopefully they learn from that. And then hopefully maybe we set a little precedent there and we could get that to happen a little more regularly. Although, of course, as we talked about, the prices of things are maybe higher than they should be, slash, definitely higher than they should be from what I've seen. So, there's still plenty of that. But yeah, in terms of actually getting people to and from games, yeah, I think like they'll figure that out.
Yeah, you bring up a great point too. Like if you're trying to go, on Google, before you come over here and you're trying to find out what's the best way to get to Boston Stadium, you're not going to find too much information because it's not a real thing. That's not what it's called, right? It's like you would hope that, hey, look, if you're trying to figure this out, best way to get there, what you want to do is you want to Google Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts, because that is where you're actually going. There's, just a lot of stuff that, people we're trying to get to the stadium on roads that are through neighborhoods that, aren't normally used by Patriots fans that obviously most of them know how to get there, right? Like, you don't take the side roads and so on and so forth. So, yeah, for sure. I definitely, I mean, anytime you come into Massachusetts, if you don't know what you're getting yourself into and you decide to drive on public roads, you're in for a bit of a surprise. So hopefully there's some sort of education and prep course to get them ready for that experience for sure. But just generally, the grass has been down for a couple weeks now. Brazil and France played on it. The Legacy have been on it a couple times. The Revs have been on it once. To me, it looks pretty good. It looks like it's in good shape. It looks like it's able to hold up multiple games and multiple days. But you've been there as well. What have your thoughts been on the implementation of the grass?
Well, I do know that they are guarding that pretty relentlessly, in terms of just keeping people off it. I mean, they're doing everything they can. And like I said, this isn't their first rodeo. I mean, they've installed grass at Gillette before and, held international games there. This time I know is different. It's much more involved and invested effort and it's a longer term effort. Obviously, it's going to be down there for months, which is a bonus and kind of a maybe a little bit of a bizarre reality for the Revs and for the Legacy, who are going to play there for part, but not all of their season, I guess. And so that's a whole other can of worms that we'll deal with. That's an August problem or whatever, a late July problem. But yeah, it seems great. You just watching like the Revs play on it or watching the Legacy play on it. You think about, oh well, I know how the ball normally bounces, and it's not doing that, because that's real grass out there, and it does give it a little more, yeah, I think of a sort of a rich and I no pun intended, but kind of organic feel, of how soccer should be played, of how the ball should be bouncing and moving in a game. And you look at a player like Carlos Hill, and you just know, like, he, as much as he has made the turf his home in the last however many years, you could tell he lives a little more, especially with his passing when it's on grass. And I think you can just see, like, he cuts passes differently, and that's fun about being there in person. And we're privileged to have the view from the press box and whatnot. Is like, you're up higher, you see things a little better, and you can just watch guys even when the camera's not on them. And yeah, it's like you watch, just how he just hits the ball and how other players are just moving, and some of the passes that they're pulling off that just would run out of bounds normally. And you're like, oh no, those are laying up a little bit. So that's an interesting dynamic for sure. And then that will, hopefully play out in a successful way in the tournament. There won't be any, you know, conspicuous issues or anything that like interrupt the games. I'm sure if that's what they can achieve, then that will be a success for them. And, you know, it's a good crew down there. I think that's what they're headed towards, barring some serious problem or unforeseen issue or something. But from what I've seen so far, I mean, it's like, you know, I just hope, to get on my soapbox for a second, that this is a precursor to them saying, we're going to go back to grass at that stadium, because I think the tide seems to be turning pretty decisively against artificial surfaces, even amongst NFL players, which 10 years ago was not the case. And you see a more, sort of a stronger effort made from NFLPA. And as sad as it is to say, as someone who loves soccer, and that's where my heart is, it's really the NFL players who are going to move this down there at Gillette. If that's going to happen, if they're going to go back to grass, it's going to be because the Patriots like mandate it, basically. So at some point that may happen. I was hoping it would happen this summer. It seemed like a natural, you know, uh, break to do that, or just natural opportunity. But yeah, maybe not. So we'll see. But that will be a dynamic to watch going forward, though, for sure.
Yeah, I know it's complicated, right? Because they wanna have these concerts when the Revs are away in the summer, right? That's prime opportunity for them, to fill that stadium up, and, you can't have 10, 15,000 people on a giant stage, trampling on the grass. It would never recover. I think we saw that last year. Red Bulls, they hosted some sort of event in between games, and the field was in pretty rough shape. It's not what it's designed for. And obviously, I don't think the Crafts are going to splurge for Real Madrid's system, where they just put the grass underground for a couple days. And I don't know that they're going to go to that extent. I think you're right, though. It will probably hinge on the Patriots themselves deciding, actually, we need to be on grass, because that's what's best for our players, and then the Revs will benefit from it. But in the meantime, it is nice, right? It's nice to go there and see them play on a grass field that is a bit more firmly into the ground than what we've seen in the past. So yeah, it's a nice little preview of what life could be like, for
And
sure.
it looks nice
It
too. I
does.
know
It
that's like
does.
such
Yeah.
a weak point of analysis, but just from an aesthetic standpoint, it just looks nice. And so I don't know. It's just one of those things where it seems like that's kind of what everyone wants, except for guys who own the thing, who are maybe already billionaires, right? Who are trying to host like stadium stuff. I don't know. I have less understanding for that. And I'm like, look, this thing is fundamentally a stadium for sports. And if the
Yeah.
athletes want grass, put grass down.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Absolutely. And just quickly, World Cup qualification, like we said, Iraq plays Bolivia. So if you're listening to this, you will know the result of that already. Congo and Jamaica are currently in extra time, so you'll know that result as well. But the ones that we do know, Sweden is headed to the World Cup over Poland. Turkey is headed in over Kosovo. Czechia is in over Denmark. And Bosnia and Herzegovina are in over the Italian national team, which comes as a surprise to almost no one. It's not a surprise to me. I posted this morning that they would draw 1-1 and lose on penalties, but I took the afternoon off just in case I was wrong. Turns out I was right. So, Hayden, I think the big story here from a local perspective is Esmir Baraktarovic. His penalty is actually the penalty that qualified Bosnia and Herzegovina for the World Cup. So that's a pretty special moment that I'm sure I'll appreciate much, much more in June when he comes back over to the U.S. to play in the World Cup.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I know it. In the circumstances, had it been Greece who lost in those circumstances, I would feel the same as you right now. I assure you. But um, yeah, I mean, it's really a tremendous story when you think about, he was just a very talented prospect, of which, they've had several talented prospects come through their academy. There's not anything that, like, obviously there's nothing that guarantees that Esmir would have grown up to be or to develop what he is, really still developing to become. He's still a very young player. But he is absolutely, at this moment, an unabashed success story for the Revs and their academy developmental system. And he was someone they recruited from Wisconsin. I mean, I know they call him the Milwaukee Messi, even though I'm told by Wisconsin people that that's nowhere near, I think, Appleton, where he's actually from. So,
Oh,
but
yeah.
whatever, it's a cool nickname.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to let that get in the way of it. So, but it's like he came into the team, and I remember, he was right away. You could tell he was just a very different and interesting player. I think would be the sort of vague terms but he's just like the way he, would get in between the lines in space, the way he would try to play passes and whatnot. It was like different than other young players. And you're like, okay, there's a little more of a brain there. There's a little more of a sense of soccer, again, to just use a sort of generality, but just like you used to have, like, if we're using like sort of FIFA video game terms, like his awareness was higher, and so I just always felt like he's a smart guy and also a very technical player. And he's gone on to, become a member of their regular team there at PSV, which is, one of the great developmental teams and, really one of the great teams historically, in Europe in a sense. And obviously, one of the best teams in that league, and puts you in a prime position to maybe move on if he can keep growing and developing as a player to an even bigger club. But obviously at the moment, I mean, I know people, he could have chosen to play for the US, but he wanted to play for, his native land because that's, because I know, sort of emotionally there was attachment there from his parents. Um, and there's, I know, like, speaking of the Blazing Musket, like, Seth Maycomer wrote a great thing about him, and they covered him extensively. And that's that. It is like, a fantastic story. And for him to now, I remember the story about him, like how he had the Ed and Checo poster on as well as a kid, and then
Hmm.
ended up, getting to play with him. And now, like, he's the official reason why they're going to a World Cup. I mean, that's like a magical thing. So all Italy, you know, ramifications and jokes aside, like, that is a beautiful moment for a guy who started his professional career here and is now coming back to the US to play in a World Cup. So, in a lot of, like I said, some, not so great news around the World Cup. There are still, because it's soccer, like, there's still some just beautiful stories, and this is absolutely one of them, even at the expense of the Italians.
Yeah, I mean, he was, to be honest, I mean, he was outstanding through the entire game. Bosnia and Herzegovina had to play 120 minutes on Thursday night, and they had to go and do it all over again. Not too long after that. But yeah, I mean, Esmir he's just brilliant through the whole game. He's getting on the ball, getting himself space, got past DeMarco, several times, put in some excellent crosses, put some good balls into the box, nearly scored on a couple of occasions from those crosses. But I mean, he was definitely, I'd say he's probably the best player on the field, for either team. So I think he's done really, really well. And it'll be interesting to see, like you said, can he finish the season out strong with PSV? Can he have a good World Cup? And we know that, deservedly or not, if you have a good World Cup, you can play yourself into a bigger role at a bigger club pretty quickly. So it'll be interesting to see how his career continues to grow. But there's no reason I think it's going to do anything but that, right? Just he's not even. I don't think he's even 21 yet, and he just seems to be going from strength to strength. So no, great for him. Very exciting. It'd be great to see him come back over here and play some games in the U.S. over the summer. So on that, the Revs, have a new head coach, Marko Mitrovic. They've gotten off to a bit of a slow start. I'm perfectly content to just not have to talk about the other guy anymore for a little bit longer. But what have your early impressions of Mitrovic been? And just what do you think about the team kind of getting off to a slow start? Is this something you kind of expected? And can they recover from this?
Yes, I mean, they absolutely can recover from this. I am always a big believer in to reference the other guy, I guess, Bruce Arena, that in MLS, the second half of the season is the season. So as long as you just don't absolutely butcher it in the first half of the season, and that will be particularly important because this year is going to be kind of odd with the World Cup breakup anyway and all that stuff and the way it's kind of structured. As long as you just don't totally tank, and can kind of stay vaguely in touch with the last playoff or with the playoff line,
Mhm.
then you absolutely have a chance to really put it together in the second half of the season. I think that's just kind of how the league works a little bit. A lot of teams are kind of close to each other. A lot of teams have, because of the nature of the roster structure and the salary cap and all that, there are no all-star teams out there. So every team has like some sketchy parts or some parts on there that they kind of have to hide or whatever, maneuver around, and no one has like strength on strength. So yeah, there's always going to be opportunity to make a comeback if you're just a little below the playoff line or, find your form, I guess. And you look at I know, you look at how they've gone so far. It's what is it? One win and three losses. But you look through a lot of, those games. I think other than the opener where they were decisively outplayed and cut open by Nashville, those other games were they're very much right there. And I know that's sort of Caleb Porter speak, but I actually do think that, like you go back and you look at the Red Bull game, that's a 1-0 loss. They're right there, and I think St. Louis, like that game hinges on some, a couple of key points that, as they kind of go along, I think they're going to be a little sharper at, that's interrupted by this like a 6-1 win over Cincinnati, where I described it as like a sort of a dormant volcano erupting out of nowhere. And you're like, well, there's 6 goals. My goodness. But, credit where it's due. And that sort of showed, I think, a lot of the potential of Mitrovic's system, which is trying to get guys to, go forward a little more, to play a little more with the ball and to try to, interchange positions and play a little more, yeah, with like fluidity and a little more, just, I guess, forward charge, which was lacking last year for sure. And so I think, the more experience they get, he brought in a lot of young guys and that's, guys with experience playing for him who are all younger players. And, I kind of like that model, honestly, if you're going to, try to find success in MLS is, you want to, as we were just talking about Esmir, I mean, they are the Revs in their best form and their best version, I think can be a club that competes, but a club that also is, develops. And I think they're aiming to try to do that too. And I know that's kind of a, eat your cake and have it too possibility where it can kind of just fall apart and you can kind of be neither. Um, Mitrovic has experience developing players for sure. And just being around him, I think there's just more of a calm at the club, I think a little bit, especially in the last couple years. I think he is, has a potential anyway. I mean, it's still very early and who knows how it'll go, but he has a potential to be kind of a steadying force there for a little bit, which like aside from wins or losses or anything else, I think the club just kind of needs that in order to get its feet back under itself a little bit after a tough period. So yeah, they're going through it right now. But I think, some of those games are more competitive than maybe the score lines look or the results look, I guess. And so I'm going to withhold judgment for now and give them a little time to figure some things out. Because again, we've seen at various points when it does click, it looks great. So who knows if they could kind of, you know, figure it out a little bit and have a little time to get themselves together. I think there's no reason why they can't, move up in the standings a little bit and maybe get back into the playoffs potentially.
Yeah, it's been encouraging because I think we've seen changes from week to week in terms of the personnel and the way that they're playing, right? Like we've seen, it wasn't like before where it was just, well, we've been prepping all week and training really hard, blah 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 blah, and then they come out and say, well, this is the same stuff that we just watched this a week ago. It does seem like there is progression in the effectiveness of their pressing, the way that they're moving the ball. Like it does seem like things are evolving, and like you said, I mean, really, you could put two of those games. You could almost put two of those games. The Rebel game, they left a player unmarked in the 6-yard box on a corner. That usually doesn't go very well, and it didn't. So if they mark a player in the 6-yard box, maybe they get out of there with a 0-0 draw, and they take a point. They take a point away early on in the season, which would have been a nice bounce back from Nashville. And then the St. Louis game, same thing. They left a guy unmarked in the 6-yard box again. So it's like, hopefully that is a thing that we don't see 3 or 4 more times this season. But that's an easy thing in theory to clean up, right? Like guys, we need to make sure that this specific thing has already happened twice. That really, for a professional team, that's got to be it. It can't happen again. So I don't think they're that far off. And like you said, he has brought in his guys, right? But what we've seen in the last several years is when the coach brings in his guys, it's the Josie Altadors and Max Giroudis of the world, where it's the excitement level isn't really there because it seems like these guys are coming in well after their prime, or in the case of somebody like a Will Sands, probably isn't going to have much of a prime to really get too excited about. So instead, we see Griffin Yao, Brooklyn Reigns, Ethan Kohler. I haven't seen too much of Kohler. He had a rough first game there, and then most recently Marcos Zambrano. So is it different in that way as well? That he's bringing in guys he used to coach, but the guys he used to coach are all under 23 years of age.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like inherently just more optimistic because you're just
Mm-hmm.
by definition kind of looking on an upward trajectory, hopefully for those guys. I wish them all the best. Yeah, I mean there's an excitement to that. So, yeah, of course, a younger team, they're trying to do it for the first time. So they're all hungry. Or that group, they all want it. And what's interesting about Mitrovic is that I think where previously, like again, like Bruce Ball was like, focus on your stars, get them the ball, and get wingers and or outside backs who can just bomb forward and let's just play offense. Through sort of I don't want to say street ball, but like just like it's not the most complicated mechanism. I think
No.
with Porter, it was like very cautious and very guarded and trying to keep everything tight. And then, just by default, offense, I don't know. You guys figure that out. But with Mitrovic, it feels like, I mean, you look at just like Carlos, previously, and maybe this is a factor that, he's 1 year older and maybe this is, going to be more of a thing, but just like he would always be the guy who would far and away, have the most touches for at least the Revs, if not everyone in the game in the game. It's like he would lead the game. And already this season, that multiple times that has not happened. So it's not that he's not involved. You look like he's right there. He's number 2 or 3 or whatever on that list. But the fact that he's not like the clear cut guy, you're just like, okay, so they're not just like playing completely through him. Like they're trying to
Yeah.
do something a
Yep.
little more diversified, a little more different. They're trying to, play a more holistic, attacking game in that sense when they have the ball. So again, I don't know if that's good yet. Maybe that won't work out. Maybe, it will fall on its face and they'll be like, why did he do that? But I do like that he's trying something new. And I think that over time, that is a smarter approach to try to build a stronger overall team and to try to have a more cohesive, effort from everyone across the board. So again, there are little signs in there, just, looking in the box score and whatnot, even if it hasn't fully translated to the final score yet. So, you know, TBD.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he strikes, and I don't know this. I have an opportunity to speak to him or go to any training sessions or anything. But to me, it seems like Porter was a little too rigid with like there's rules and all these things that must be followed. Whereas Bruce was kind of just like, hey, you're professional players, go figure it out. Mitrovic seems to be kind of in the middle where I feel if I had to guess, it would be more he's giving them guidelines, right? Like we're playing within a structure, but like your decision making is it's up to you to make these decisions within this somewhat loose structure that I'm providing, especially at least in attack. So I do think it's a little bit of both because clearly, look, Bruce obviously had a ton of success in 2021, but turned around in 2022, and they missed the playoffs. So it didn't always click as much as we might
Right.
like to think that Bruce was perfect. And then Porter
And I
obviously,
will say, oh, and I just sorry to interrupt. I will say that, just with Mitrovic, it is like, yeah, it's hopefully kind of like a balance between the two. And his
yeah,
mind is very
yeah,
like analytical and but like sort of, just it's simplified. It's like he also just doesn't have time for, stuff about like we ask him like when they won his first game, he said, "What does this mean for you?" And he doesn't have time for questions like that. It's like it's just he'll just kind of he's not mad. He'll just kind of brush right past it. So there's kind of like he's just completely he just seems very professional. Like he just seems like he's completely focused on other people, on his players, on his staff. And that at a again, like I said, seems like a steadying influence there, which if nothing else, results aside, is maybe just going to be good for the club for a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, two quick things on the Revs, and then we can move on. But it is inevitable that they are going to have to figure out a way to play without Carlos Hill, either through slow decline as he ages, which is inevitable, or obviously there's going to be a future where at some point he's not going to be here anymore. It's at least possible that Hill might leave before Mitrovic does. I mean, probably not, but that is at least in the realm of possibilities, right? So they are going to have to at some point figure out a way to play without this guy. In the Cincinnati game, I think was a great example. They had 6 goals and he had no goals and 1 assist, which I don't think anyone would have thought that was possible. Can the New England Revolution score 6 goals and Carlos only has 1 assist? I mean, that to me, I would have said, no, there's no way. How? Right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's just, I as you said, like they're going, that day is going to happen at
Someday,
some
right?
point.
Yeah.
We know that. So, that's it's never too early to plan for that. And it's also just like smart to plan for that because, I mean, knock on wood, it hasn't happened in a while, but if he gets hurt for an
Yeah.
extended
Yep.
period of time, then you're forced to do that. And I think the most recent time that really happened was, I mean, luckily it was years ago, but I remember, I think it was the 2020 season where he was hurt for a lot of the regular season. Him and Bo were out for a lot of the regular season, and the Revs looked very, they made the playoffs and they ended up making a great run in the postseason that year. But that was only when Carlos came back, and they also figured out that this guy Tejan Buchanan's pretty good too, and maybe we'll put him at right wing back or whatever it was. But it was like that. They didn't look great for a lot of that regular season with him. So yeah, they need to. It's like getting good insurance. Like you want to just line that up just in case, and also it's going to be good for your long term anyway. So yeah, we'll see. But that is a smart. I don't know if that's an intentional thing, like I said, or not. Like I haven't seen enough of this team yet to really deduce that, or we haven't heard that from anyone. So, but that's just been a statistical reality that I thought, has been kind of an interesting development so far.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they're not going to come out and say, "Hey, we're planning for the decline of Carlos Hill." Uh, not quite yet, anyway. And then, okay, last thing on the road, real quick. Diego Fagundes comes back. I mean, the thing that's impressed me the most is a lot of people were saying very early on, you know, this team really lacks depth all of a sudden out wide and in the attacking positions, where like Malcolm Fry is sometimes your first option off the bench, and then they go and get Diego Fagundes. So, in addition to the fact that it helps with a clear depth issue on the team, it seemed like a no-brainer. He was available. We all know his story. He wants to come back, and they made it. I mean, to me, I don't see any downside to this, and it seems like a great move.
Absolutely. And it's like we always heard like, Diego's like a good guy around the team. Like there's no problem with that. I'm glad that he, left in a way and went and, had a whole career, won an MLS Cup and like was, successful in multiple other places for periods of time and did well. And now he's back. Like, we were talking about the Revs Academy. I mean, he's the
The
original.
original, yeah,
So yeah, and that you really can't put a value on maybe having that guy and all of his experience in New England coming up being the youngest guy and being, this special thing that they had and receiving all this attention, for the Revs, I guess, in regards to that. And then having that guy be around Peyton Miller and some of these other, and all these younger players that Mitrovic have brought in, like that just feels like a force multiplier that you can't measure, as we were just saying, in a box score, like that you cannot measure in a box score. Those are intangibles that go beyond that. That whether he plays, whether he scores a goal, he did have, I think, like a secondary assist in that 6-1 win.
yeah, yeah. It was
It's like
nice little
whatever
pass.
else, right? Whatever else he contributes, like that feels almost like dressing compared to just the potential impact that he could have as a positive developer of the current group of players who are like him from 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I was really excited about that, and yeah, hopefully it works out, and hopefully I need to pick up a bunch of points in this 3-game homestand for sure. So we'll see. Uh, so Legacy, speaking of starting things off and playing in Gillette and taking advantage of the grass, they've had a couple games at home already. The home opener It seemed pretty good. 30,000 people in attendance. I think it was, as our friends at the Swan Dive podcast said, it was briefly the highest attended home opener. That was apparently that was completely and totally destroyed. I think Denver nearly doubled that. But anyway, for a brief period of time, they had the best turnout on the opening day that NWSL has had. So, what have you thought about their season so far? And what do they? This is what we've been asking everybody. Like, what do they have to get right to stick around this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think they yeah, I mean, well, if we're talking long term, what does the club need for viable success long term? I mean, they're trying that with White Stadium and trying to get their own venue that is literally their own place where, they can just be in their own space. And I think that will be a huge thing. Now, I know we're going to get into, sort of talking about that. And I know you've been talking about, the White Stadium and all of the ramifications, the financial impact of that, and those are all questions obviously worth asking. But if the result is that the Legacy have their own venue and it's like a nice place that is a cool setting, technically in Boston for fans to attend, and for also for because it's going to be a public-private thing, so you might have younger um, you know Boston players training there alongside pro players that or in a pro venue and sort of growing up there, like you might, we're as we're talking about academies, like that might be a boon for their academy, and that would be absolutely a way to succeed over time, especially as the sort of global world of women's soccer continues to go up and up, and the NWSL continues to have to compete with overseas leagues that don't have salary caps and whatnot. The best way to continue to stay viable and relevant and competitive is to develop your own talent, and especially in a city where, I mean, how many local guys play for the Red Sox or Patriots or whatever? It's like if you have local players on your team and then simultaneously you have these international players from Brazil and wherever else playing for your team, like that's a cool brand. And so that is how you succeed, I think. And especially, and then on the field, I think they have a ways to go, as most expansion teams tend to. I was kind of reserving hope that maybe, in a salary cap soccer league, as we've seen before in MLS, like an expansion team can come in and absolutely
Right
succeed right
away.
away.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case with Legacy so far on the field. But I think that's kind of what everyone was a little bit expecting. I think what I've seen so far from Felipe Patau is a distinct style and a distinct approach to the game, which I think fans will like. It's just they need to, defend a little better so they don't just have to be, playing catch up in all these games. And then they need to find a little more consistency up top, particularly from, Gutierrez and some of those players who they brought in to, deliver the goods here. But yeah, I've been excited from what I've seen so far from them. They just haven't been able to put results together. But long term, I think it looks. I don't want to say surprisingly. It looks okay. I mean, I say surprisingly because like our frame of reference are just a series of teams that have not worked out here, women's
Yeah.
soccer teams in the past 20 years, and so. I do think that the Legacy have a lot going for them that they can break the cycle there. So long term, that seems good. Short term, it might be a little tough though.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it seemed like they put together, a pretty good roster, or an experienced roster at least. But like you said, I mean, I think maybe like San Diego made it look a little too easy. Like, hey, you're getting off to a fresh start here. You can just throw together a really good team and off you go. But I don't. That doesn't seem to. Like I said again, when we've talked to Jackie said that it's not necessarily a thing in NWSL where a team just comes out and dominates right away. Do you think it's a challenge for them on the field and growing a fan base to, they've got to split this first year where, they've got a bunch of games at Gillette, but then they've got a bunch of games even further down south, down in Rhode Island. I mean, it seems like that's going to be a big stumbling block in year one for on-field success, but then also again, trying to talk about like growing this fan base. Somebody has a really good time down in Pawtucket. You've got to then try and sell them on coming all the way up into Boston and getting to that stadium in a completely different way next year.
Yeah, no doubt. I think like that's that's probably the toughest thing for them. I mean, results aside, everything else aside, because that's almost kind of a write down, as we are saying, and Jackie knows better than we do in terms of like NWSL and how that works. Like, yeah, it's hard to win year one. So I don't think there were a lot of expectations for on field, but off the field, you're right. It's such an important, critical point to really try to hit the ground running, at least in terms of establishing just a good rapport with fans. And it's so hard to do that when you're playing in someone else's stadium and then you're playing in another stadium, that's farther away. You're kind of just like a perpetual road team a little bit in that sense. And I know that, I'm sure they're doing everything they can at those venues to make them feel welcome. And I appreciate that. But like ultimately, yeah, it's not their home stadium. So, and it's, they're immediately encountering the kind of demoralizing optics that the Revs regularly encounter, which is that you are playing in a
Yeah.
football stadium, and that stadium is designed for an otherworldly, attendance figure for a sport that has decades of precedence and dominance in American culture. And so to hold up the mirror against and compare yourself to that is ridiculous and impossible. And, I think it's going to be a little bit like, they kind of just have to survive this first season and just try to like, manage it in such a way that, yeah, you don't like totally dishearten your fan base, I guess. But yeah, I think, look, they're off to, in terms of the support, it seems like a good start. And I hope that they can kind of just keep that going, even, going against the grain of bad results, obviously, which is always, a tough way to draw fans. But, if they can kind of just not rename themselves Boss Nation or do
Yeah, yeah,
other things that might not work out well, then, they'll survive this year. And then hopefully 50 years from now, they'll look back and be like, oh, that's crazy. Remember when the Patriots played at Fenway, and like it'll be one of those things and, they'll be established. But they're just, yeah, they're going through it a little bit right now. So, I think fans maybe realize that or maybe going to persevere, but it is tough. And you're absolutely right. I mean, year one, that's a difficult way to have to get the ball rolling.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we saw that to a lesser extent because they were still obviously in Rhode Island. But RAFC, their first year wasn't at what was supposed to be their home either. And then even into their second year, right, they had to start with that marathon road trip. So this year, the guys on Raising Anchor were saying like, this is actually the first, it's year three, but it's actually our first year. All of our home games are in the stadium that we're supposed to be playing in. And it's taken till year three to get there. So, but and they obviously have had on-field success in the meantime. But for sure, it can, I think, hopefully the ownership knew that this was going to be a longer process. Whereas again, with the Breakers, you just kind of never really knew what they were trying to do. But yeah. So look, the stadium, seems like this is going to be fine and it's going to happen. It's going to get built. There is still some legal wranglings to stop it from. Well, at this point, stop it being constructed because it's already been torn down. So they can't stop the first part. Something will have to be put there, or no one wins, and then there's no stadium at all. But very surprisingly, the Kraft Group has come out in support of White Stadium. They wrote an amicus brief. Now I don't know what that is, but apparently it's some sort of legal filing that one puts forth in a trial to say, hey, we are on board with White Stadium and this renovation project going forward, and we think it would be a good thing for all involved that this happens. So I immediately thought of you and I's previous conversations about Josh Kraft, who's I'm sure is a big fan of the show, and how he basically ran his entire campaign last year coming out against this exact stadium. So what sort of rumblings? What is Thanksgiving going to be like at the Kraft household this year?
Well, I mean, I'm sure it probably won't even come up because they just have other things. It's just like, they're just so past it. But you're right. I mean, it just smacks of just such, sort of like opportunism, I guess, or a little bit, where it's just like, oh, that thing that I mean, of course, I don't know. I'm sure Josh Kraft may still very much be against it. He doesn't speak for the Kraft group,
Right, right,
it's or the
right.
Kraft, it's like that's not his voice necessarily. So he may still feel that way, but it does, smack of like, oh, that thing that I vociferously spoke against, not even 12 months ago. Yeah, by the way, we approve it, like at the, just whispering, at the side of his mouth now. So, but Yeah, but I guess I can kind of see it because I mean, obviously the Kraft group itself is still trying to build its own soccer stadium, and so is trying to, um, probably just stay on terms with the other teams and just keep that push going, and
And the
maybe
mayor,
try
yeah,
to exactly, and maybe realize, hey, we lost that one, so maybe we'll come back with our tail between our legs here. But or I'm sure they would phrase it very differently. But yeah, it is just um, it does smack of a little bit of hypocrisy there after all that to then come back and just sort of be like, yeah, by the way, we're in favor of it. But again, yeah, I mean, Josh Kraft and the Kraft group are not the same thing.
well, that
So
point, right? That
um,
that point has been proven now, right? I guess that
yeah,
Josh Kraft,
unabashedly.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's just it is a strange one though. I did chuckle a little bit seeing that after all the back and forth. I mean, I just if you it blew my mind last year that the mayoral race, it was just so funny that like that was the decisive issue apparently, and of course it wasn't because he dropped out before the general election. So clearly it was not a real swing issue for voters. But it was just so funny. There was like there are two soccer stadiums being built, and that's at the center of this mayoral race again. You know, with all the stuff with the World Cup and everything, like what a big year for soccer there. It was just like, it was front and center in local politics and everything. And I mean, and it still will be because obviously the final price on that White Stadium renovation is going to keep going up. I would point out that the opponents of that have also over time released their own plans, and that I believe that the alternative that they proposed that itself has eventually doubled in price from what they initially proposed to what they said was a viable alternative. So I think it just goes to show you that stuff costs a lot of money. I know everyone's experiencing that in a million different ways right now, and so that's just kind of an ongoing thing. But yeah, I mean, that's a. I don't want to give that short shrift. Those are very important questions for local community and a city and its tax base and whatnot, and where that money gets spent. But yeah, long term, it will be a great thing for the legacy, and so and for soccer in the city. So from that standpoint, I can see why the Kraft Group would be in on that because yeah, they're looking at it as like, okay, if we're going to try to build our stadium, then we want to have another one there too, and we will publicly support that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, on a serious note, yeah, like you said, I mean, when the city of Boston initially thought they're going to be putting in, whatever it was, 80, 90 million. And if that number climbs to 140, 150, 160, that's real money that, state and local governments actually have to have the money that they spend. It's not like the federal, they really don't have that much of an ability to just, print money and run a deficit as much as they might want for, whatever things that they feel like doing. So yeah, I mean, it's like you said, I mean, it does have a real effect. But I do think ultimately when this is done, if it ends up being done that the way that the legacy wants it, that stadium, yes, it will benefit the legacy. But the original agreement that I saw, they're only going to be in there 2 days a week, every 2 weeks, and then the rest of the time, Boston Public Schools can, they can use it for what they want. So I think it's pretty ideal scenario. And Mayor Wu made a good point, on several occasions that they've tried, right? They've tried to fix this stadium 3 or 4 times in the past, and it just sat there and got worse and worse and worse. And she said, "Look, this is a way to get it done. So this is what we did." So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But hopefully it, hopefully it does. And the legacy. I think they're hoping to be in there by the summer of 2027. So I think they're tempering their expectations a little bit with that as well, and not getting caught saying, "Oh yeah, we'll be there," day one, 2027. Because my
Right. Well,
guess,
it's you mentioned Rhode Island, and it might be a sort of scenario like that where it's not really until year 3 maybe that they're playing all their home games in there. But yeah, I think that's still like they're just sort of fingers crossed that they'll be in there at year 2. TBD on the date though.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you don't want to promise your seat because the season ticket holders, we do know they get to do like to pick their seats at Gillette. And then a couple months later, it was like, oh, well, then we'll also be down in Centerville, and you won't be able to pick your seats down there, right? So, yeah, I think they just need to be very careful with the loyal fans that they've already got, right, from the Boston area that are going to go down to Foxborough. All right, last one, Hayden, explain this for us. You did a sound bite bracket on Boston.com, and I can be honest, when I saw that, my immediate thought was it has to be the Rick Pitino, Bird, McHale, and Parrish, aren't walking through that door from, if I believe it's like the mid to late 90s. That the word Boston sports soundbite, that is immediately triggered in my mind anytime I hear that phrase thrown out there. So how did this come about, and how did that not end up winning? Could you?
Well, I mean, I was trying. I'll say that now in retrospect. Even though as someone who is organizing the bracket, I was shamelessly like one step away from stuffing ballot boxes or whatever. Um, but no, it was every year we do a reader voting bracket of Boston themed sports something for March Madness, and like I think last year we did best trades in Boston sports history, and so I was trying to pick like a topic that's gonna try to appeal to as many sectors as possible and make it fun. And so this year we were like, yeah, let's do sound bites, and so I had to come up with some kind of ground rules, and one of them was um, no like media calls because that could be its own whole bracket because there's so many of those. So like, Havlicek stole the ball and like those
Oh,
those are
sure.
great sound bites.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are obviously iconic sound bites, but that would be and
Next year.
we haven't decided on 27, but like that could be its own, that could be the bracket then. It's like best calls kind of. And so but sound bites I was like non-media. And so, we had all kinds of characters in there. We had Menino with, Veritek splits the uprights, and we had Giselle's famous quote of "My husband cannot throw and catch the ball," and she said some other stuff in there too, of course. And we had a whole range of people in there. Parcells, they want you to cook the dinner, or they at least let you pick out the groceries. I really tried to go back. I made sure the Red Sox GM Lou Gorman was in there from that very Zen-like quote that he said when he was negotiating with Clemens, where he said, "The sun will rise, the sun will set, and I'll have lunch." And I wanted those things in there because even though I know that they're not going to win, it's great to have like a bracket with all kinds of stuff in there because you're trying to like, teach people about stuff and inform people and be kind of a news organization while you're doing this fun project with the bracket, which we are. So, that was the goal, and it went really well. It did better than the last year's version and every metric that, our people are measuring every second of every day because that's how digital news works. But it got a lot of, engagement or whatever. It did well in that respect. And at the end, I I seeded it based on what I felt was kind of the most ubiquitous all the way down, or what was most deserving and then ubiquitous. And so the one seed was actually Bill Belichick's run to Cincinnati because I'm like, that's just kind of the most popular soundbite for your average New England sports fan in 2026. Like they've kind of all heard that. Whereas I have colleagues who were very unfamiliar and some had just never heard of the Patino rant, which I was like, I thought they were nuts and I thought they were crazy. And then someone will watch it and be like, it didn't seem that bad because they've seen like 2026, they've been living out in our current media where it's rants are
Yeah,
happening
yeah.
all the time. So, it maybe doesn't hit as hard to someone seeing that for the first time now. But for those of us who remember that period of time in Celtics history when things were pretty bleak, yeah, that one definitely, I mean, that was the number 2 overall seed. And then it was David Ortiz's This Is Our Effing City was number 3, and then KG, or no, that was 4, and KG was This Anything Is Possible. That was the 3rd seed.
Okay.
But then out of nowhere, I had actually a late addition that I made to the bracket. I had another entry in there, and then I was like, no, we gotta modernize it a little bit. So I got a Kevin Millar, and when I say modern, from 20 years ago, 2004, but like 21st century, I guess. I had to get Kevin Millar in there saying, "Don't let us win today," because that is a famous soundbite, and the Red Sox fans love that. And it's funny because you learn a lot about your readers and things like this, where it's reader votes. And it turns out our readers just still really love the 2004 Red Sox, which of course I do too, and everyone does. So it makes sense, I guess, that in a popularity contest, it would be the Kevin Millar as an 11 seed, unprecedented run for an 11 seed in the Boston.com sports bracket. And David Ortiz, uh, shame on me for making him a 4 seed. They met in the final, and Ortiz won decisively because people, I mean, it makes sense. People really, really resonated with that moment. It's like even I remember like I found the tweet. It's still up. Like the FCC from that time was like, "No, we stand with Poppy and the people of Boston," or whatever about like him dropping an F-bomb on live TV or whatever. It was just one of those like kind of great moments in what was obviously a terrible tragedy, the aftermath of the
Yeah.
tragedy. It was just a really, really legendary moment for Ortiz. And so I was very happy with how the whole project went. And I think like my goal for that is always just who cares about the seeding? Just try to make sure that like, you know, all the best things are in the bracket somehow, and that,
Right.
they're
Right.
not maybe playing each other in the first round. And I think I succeeded. I didn't really hear too many complaints. Most complaints were about people saying, well, why isn't, media calls in there? And then I had to explain, well, you
Explain.
didn't read the
Right.
intro or whatever, and it's like, so,
Yeah.
but
Read the article.
it's
Yeah.
a fun project. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I felt curmudgeon saying that, but it was, it's like, and it's a fair point. I guess you could put those in there, but we would like to keep it at 16 because the thing with brackets like that is like they kind of turn into dust after a week. It's like they launch on Selection Sunday, and then after a week, everyone's kind of, it's still going, and they get tired of it. So we want to try to get in and get out like in some semblance of time, and we're able to do that very successfully. But it's just like, I'm privileged that they let me do silly and whimsical and fun things like that on the site still. And, we have a whole crew of people who help me with that, including, people helping design the bracket to make it look like fun and nice and cool and make the presentation look good. And we've gotten better at that over the years. And so proud of our team. I sound like a coach right now. Took every person on the roster to really put this together, but it did. And you really realize how that is true up and down, like any team doing anything like that. So, um, I, I've been trying to catch up on sleep since that ended, but it was another successful year, and yeah, it's a fun project. So I will keep trying to do more of those things because it's like on top of all our writing and the regular reporting that we do, it's important to engage people with cool things like that, especially when you work in a sports section. That's what it should be all about. So that's what I always try to live by in that job, and so we're gonna keep trying to do things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, look, I mean, a lot of us go to the sports section or follow sports to try and enjoy ourselves and get a bit of a break from all the other stuff. So yeah, it was a great idea and it was a lot of fun. I can understand the ones that made it all the way to the end, more positive moments, right? Whereas that Rick Pitino quote was from the absolute low point of the Boston Celtics franchise.
The negativity in this
Yeah,
town,
yeah,
it
yeah.
sucks, or what, it's like, having said that, I wanted that to win though. Like, let's be clear, that is the best soundbite in my opinion. But it's just,
Yeah.
let democracy have its say. But
Yeah.
for me, it was Patino, 100%.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, Hayden, look, appreciate the time as always. If people want to continue to follow along with your work, if they want to continue to follow your coverage of soccer and in sports in Boston in general, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm on Boston.com, and so you can find me on there. Occasionally, also on the Globe side too. And I'm still on Twitter periodically,
Same,
and on
yeah.
BlueSky as well. Honestly, I forget my handles, but there aren't that many of me out there, so you could probably track me down. I don't know. You could also send like a rider on a horse or something, or maybe a carrier pigeon if you really want to surprise me or something like that. So I would appreciate that too out here in 2026. So, but um, more importantly, yeah, I'll just be around Boston this summer, and with all, like I said, with all the things that are not great about this tournament, I'm going to try to, at various points, try to connect with fans and meet people who just love soccer and talk about the game. So if you see me at Phoenix Landing or the Druid or any of these places around Boston, just come say hello, and we'll share Guinness.
All right, awesome, Hayden. Always a pleasure whenever we get a chance to have you on the show and talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show if you haven't already. You can, of course, do that and get this show wherever you get your podcasts from. Be sure to check out Hayden's work. Boston.com. We'll have his social media down in the show notes. And of course, do also occasionally be sure to check out thebentmusketig.com as well for all of our coverage of New England soccer there. So thank you very much to Hayden for joining us. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you all back here next week.